I am Bryce of the Cinder Archive, and this is Chapter 9, What's Out. They rode back into aetherglen in a silence none of them quite managed to break. The spellcaster's last, bewildered words still sitting unanswered somewhere between all 5 of them. He said Sterling didn't care anymore. He said I could keep it. Small and dangling and entirely unidentified. The kind of thing that gets louder the longer nobody says it out loud. They had gear to return and a job to report finished. They also, every one of them privately agreed without ever quite voting on it, had a question they intended to get a real answer to this time, whatever it cost the man who'd sent them looking in the first place. They had, too, an argument of their own still unfinished, one that had started somewhere on the road out of Wren Hollow and showed no particular interest in resolving itself before they reached the city gates. This is the chapter where that question finally gets asked properly, and where the asking cost the party something they didn't expect to spend. Enough. The room they've taken above a quiet tavern near the Hall district is cramped even by the standards of the carriage that brought them here. 4 narrow beds and 1 stubborn window that won't quite latch. The whole space smelling faintly of travel-worn wool, and the lingering road dust none of them have properly washed off yet. Nobody had argued for separate rooms, despite the modest extra coin it would have cost to manage it. After Wren Hollow, none of them particularly wanted to be alone with their own thoughts behind a closed door, whatever that said about the state of 5 people who'd started this job as total strangers barely 2 weeks ago. Supper had been quiet, eaten more out of habit than appetite, and the walk back from the tavern's common room up to their shared quarters had passed in the kind of silence that isn't restful, so much as simply too tired to fill. It's well past midnight by the time anyone says anything that isn't strictly logistical, and it's Wick, of all people, who says it first. "I'd do it again," he says to the ceiling, lying flat on his own narrow bed with his boots still on. "The same way. Exactly the same way. I know that's not the popular answer tonight, but I'd rather say it now than let it rot." Senna, sitting upright at the room's single small table, doesn't look up from the cup of cooling tea she's been nursing for the better part of an hour. "How can you say that so easily? I'm not saying it easily. I'm saying it because I've turned it over every way I know how to turn a thing over, and every single time I land in the same place." He sits up properly now, meeting her eyes across the room. "We found the gentlest version of an ugly job that existed to find. Nobody died. Nobody even got seriously hurt, except maybe his pride, and even that, we tried to spare him as much as the rest. I don't know what better outcome you think was sitting there for us to miss." "That's not the question," Senna says, sharper than she means it to come out, the exhaustion of the ride finally showing through the careful composure she's kept since Wren Hollow. "The question isn't whether we found the gentlest version. It's whether the gentlest version of a wrong thing is still a wrong thing. I keep coming back to it, and I can't make the math come out clean." "Then don't make it clean. Some math doesn't resolve, Senna. You're the one who spent the whole ride insisting we owe him something more honest than that. I do think we owe him that. I just don't think 'we did our best' settles the account the way you're acting like it does. What would settle it then? Genuinely, I'm asking, not arguing." Wick swings his legs off the bed, sitting forward now, elbows on his knees. "Because from where I'm sitting, you've got 3 choices that night, and I've turned all 3 over too. Walk away and leave the job undone, which means lying to Geary about it or quitting outright, neither of which you were ever going to do. Press harder and risk actually hurting him, which you refused outright, and rightly so. Or find the gentlest possible version of taking it anyway, which is exactly what we managed. Tell me which of the first 2 you'd have picked instead, and I'll take the argument seriously. I don't have a 4th option, Wick." "That's not the same as believing the 3rd one was right." "Then what is it the same as?" Senna sets her cup down, finally, harder than she means to. The small clack of it against the table, the loudest sound the room's produced all night. "It's the same as knowing we did the least amount of harm available to us and still feeling like harm was done. Those 2 things aren't in conflict. I don't understand why you keep treating them like they have to be. It's an old argument wearing new faces, the same fundamental disagreement that's been simmering since the carriage ride to Wren Hollow, except that the positions have swapped sides so completely that neither of them seems entirely sure how to occupy their own side of it properly. Wick, who'd argued hardest against the fight while it was happening, now sounds like the one trying to close the book on it. Senna, who'd pressed the fight because pressing was the only path she could see, now sounds like the one refusing to let it close at all. You argued the whole fight that there had to be a better way, Senna says, quieter now, genuinely confused rather than accusing. And there wasn't one. We both know there wasn't. So why does that make you more at peace with it, and less at peace with it for me? Wick is quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that means he's actually considering the question rather than deflecting from it. Because I spent the whole fight believing there had to be a better way, and there wasn't, and we still found the best version of the only way that existed, he says finally. That's not nothing to me. That's the difference between a world where trying matters and one where it doesn't, and I'd rather live in the first one, even if living in it still costs something. You went into that fight already braced to do whatever it took. I think that's why it's sitting heavier on you now. You never let yourself hope for better, so you got nothing to feel relieved about, once the worst didn't happen. Senna doesn't have a ready answer for that, and the room goes quiet in a way that isn't peaceful so much as simply spent. Maybe that's it, she admits, after a while, more to herself than to him. Maybe I never let myself hope, because hoping felt like a luxury I didn't have time for in the middle of a fight. I don't know how to feel relieved about an outcome I never let myself want in the first place. That sounds exhausting. It is, she says simply, and for the first time all evening there's no edge in it at all, just plain, unguarded tiredness. For what it's worth, Wick adds after a moment, I don't think less of you for carrying it. I think I'd probably trust you less if you didn't. I just don't think carrying it has to mean believing we did something wrong. Those feel like they should be the same thing. I'm not sure they are. Maybe they're not, Senna allows. I don't know yet. I'm not sure tonight's the night I figure it out. Probably not, Wick agrees, and something in his voice has softened considerably from where the argument started, the particular gentleness of someone who's pushed as hard as he means to, and is ready to let the rest settle on its own. Bram, from his own bed in the corner, says nothing through any of it, watches the exchange with the same flat, unreadable attention he's brought to every piece of friction this party's produced since Chapter 1, filing this one away alongside all the rest. Orsa sits cross-legged on the floor near the stubborn window, mending a tear in her travel cloak with small, unhurried stitches, offering no opinion because, as far as she's concerned, this particular argument belongs to the two of them, and neither version of the truth is fully wrong. Tamsin has already fallen asleep sitting up, exhausted past the point of caring how undignified it looks, her own private unease about Edrin's armor. Recognition, not alarm, tucked away somewhere she hasn't found the words for yet either. We're not going to settle this tonight, Bram says finally into the lull. Probably not ever, if I'm honest. Some things you carry instead of resolving. Get some sleep. We've got a man to ask hard questions tomorrow, and neither of you is going to ask them well exhausted. Orsa sets down her mending, finally, and looks between the two of them with the particular patience of a woman who's watched enough living things wear each other down, over far less than this. For what it's worth, since nobody's asked me, I don't think either of you is wrong. I think you're both just describing different parts of the same animal and calling it by different names. That's not a flaw in either of you. It's just what grief does, when there's nobody convenient to blame for it. That's almost comforting, Wick says. It wasn't meant to be comforting. It was meant to be true. Orsa's mouth twitches, the ghost of something almost fond. Go to sleep, both of you. The animal will still be there in the morning, same as tonight. Neither Senna nor Wick argues with that, though neither of them looks especially at peace with it either. And the argument cools the way most real disagreements actually cool, not into agreement, just into the tired, mutual decision to stop having it out loud for tonight. Nafta. Morning comes gray and unhurried, the kind of overcast aetherglen sky that makes the rift's distant glow look dimmer than usual, even at the height of day. Nobody mentions the argument from the night before, though it sits in the room with them regardless, present in the careful, deliberate way Senna and Wick avoid each other's eyes over a breakfast neither of them does much more than pick at. The dead armor itself. Edrin's, wrapped and silent in its traveling case, gets carried between them and shifts on the walk to the Gearwright Hall. Nobody volunteering to carry it for longer than they have to, and nobody quite willing to say why out loud. The debrief room at the Gearwright Hall looks exactly as it did the last time they stood in it. Bare work table, shuttered windows, the same faint smell of hot metal and alchemical solvent, permanently soaked into the walls, except that this time none of them bother with the easy banter that filled the silence while they waited for the clerk to finish her inventory. There's nothing to inventory tonight. There's only the small brass shape on the table, dormant, waiting to be woken. They'd talked briefly on the walk over about how to handle this. Bram had suggested letting Senna lead, given her standing as the one Edrin had actually spoken to. Senna had countered that maybe this time it shouldn't be the gentlest voice in the room doing the asking. In the end, nobody quite decided anything formally. They simply walked in together and stood together and let whoever felt moved to speak first do the speaking. Senna wakes the proxy herself, this time rather than waiting for someone else to do it. The lens flickers, catches, steadies into Geary's familiar mismatched scale grin. "There they are," he says, warmly, though something in the warmth feels a half-beat slower to arrive than usual, like a man bracing himself before he's even seen what's coming. "How did our mysterious miner turn out? I confess the report I got secondhand left out rather a lot of detail. He's not a criminal," Senna says without preamble. "He's a man whose body broke from 30 years in a mine, who found something that let him stand up straight again, and we took it from him. Gently as we could manage. It still cost him everything we promised ourselves we wouldn't take." The proxy's grin doesn't fall so much as it simply stops, mid-expression, the small brass face holding an almost smile that no longer reaches anywhere behind it. "I'm sorry to hear that," Geary says, carefully. "I didn't know the specifics going in, or I might have. He said something before we left," Bram cuts in, flat and even, no heat in it at all. "Said somebody told him he didn't care anymore. Said somebody told him he could keep it. We'd like to know who that somebody is." What follows is not a long silence by any reasonable measure of silence. A handful of seconds, no more. But it happens in a man who fills silences for a living, who has never once, in 3 meetings, needed even a heartbeat to find something charming to say. And this time, the silence doesn't break on its own. It simply sits there, the proxy's small face holding unnervingly, unnaturally still, no flicker, no recalibration, nothing at all, like a held breath that's forgotten how to exhale. Tamsin finds herself counting the seconds, without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, 4, the workshop oil smell of the room thickening around the wait, the way it always seems to, whenever Geary has something he isn't ready to say. "I don't know who told him that," Geary says finally, and his voice has lost every trace of its usual lightness, gone flat and careful in a way none of them have heard from him before. "I wish I did. I'd very much like to know the answer to that question myself." "That's not an answer," Senna says. "That's a wish. It's the truthful version of one, which is more than I've always managed to offer you." Something in the small brass shoulders sags, fractionally, the closest a foot-tall automaton has ever come to looking genuinely tired. "I know that's not satisfying. I know it's considerably less than what you've earned tonight, after everything you just told me you did. I don't have a better answer sitting in my pocket, much as I wish I did." "You keep doing this," Senna says, and there's real frustration in it now, the first time her voice has actually risen since they entered the room. "Every time we bring you something that should worry you more than it does, you give us a feeling instead of a fact. Sympathy instead of an explanation. I don't doubt that the sympathy is real, Geary. I'm starting to doubt that it's enough." "It isn't," Geary admits quietly. "I know it isn't. I don't have a better thing to give you tonight regardless." "Try," Orsa says quietly, the first thing she said since they entered the room. "Not the comfortable version. The true one, whatever shape it actually takes." Haha. It's Bram who breaks the next silence, and he does it the way he does most things, without raising his voice, without performing the accusation he's about to make, simply laying it on the table the way you'd lay down evidence nobody's quite ready to look at yet. He's been quiet through most of the exchange so far, watching the proxy's small face with the same flat patience he brings to reading any opponent's pattern, and something in the way he finally steps forward suggests he's been waiting for exactly this moment to say what he's clearly been carrying since the engine room of the Brass Feather. "Somebody connected to your own work is operating independently of you," he says, level, unhurried, meeting the proxy's lens without flinching from it. "Has been since at least the Sky Parrot captain's contact, the polite one with the scarf nobody could describe properly. Has been since a 5-tooth mark that's almost, but not quite, your own. It has been since a miner who got handed a piece of your craft by somebody who told him your name like they had every right to use it. He pauses just long enough to let the shape of it settle. Either you know exactly who that is, Geary, or you're too afraid to say it aloud even to us. I don't see a third option left standing. Bram, Senna starts, half out of instinct to soften it, but he doesn't stop. I'm not trying to be cruel about it, I'm trying to be accurate. His eyes don't leave the proxies. We've been hunting rumors and wreckage for 2 encounters now, and every single thread leads back to the same shape of person, and you've had a reaction to every single one of them that doesn't match professional embarrassment, however many times you've called it that. I'd like the truth, not because I think you're our enemy, because I think you're frightened of something, and frightened men make worse decisions than honest ones, and I'd rather know which kind of decision we're actually working for. Wick beside him says nothing, but there's something in the way he's gone very still that suggests he's recalculating every easy joke he's ever made about this job, in light of how plainly devastating Bram's actually managing to be without raising his voice once. Tamsin watches the proxy's face with an intensity that has nothing to do with tactics, searching perhaps for some flicker of the same recognition she'd felt touching Edrin's armor, though she couldn't say what she'd do with the answer if she found it. Bram himself says nothing further, but something private moves behind his own flat expression, that none of the others can see the shape of, an old familiar echo of a hill he doesn't talk about, of decisions made by men who never had to live with the cost of them. He recognizes this particular silence. He stood on the other side of exactly this kind of withheld truth before, waiting for someone above him to finally say the thing that would explain why good people kept paying for choices they'd never been allowed to make themselves. He doesn't say any of that aloud. He simply waits, the way he's learned to wait, for whatever's coming to finish arriving. The silence this time is different in kind from the one before it. Not held breath, but something closer to a man finally setting down a weight he's been carrying so long he's forgotten how heavy it actually is. The proxy's small frame seems to settle, fractionally, into the table itself, the brass shoulders losing whatever careful tension had been holding them upright through the rest of the conversation. "You're not wrong," Geary says quietly, "about any of it. Nobody moves. Nobody dares to, in case moving breaks whatever's finally cracked open enough to let something true through it. I've been waiting for someone to ask it plainly," he goes on, almost to himself, hoping and dreading in roughly equal measure. It's exhausting, carrying a thing nobody's allowed to ask you about directly. I didn't realize quite how exhausting until just now, hearing you say it instead of dancing around it the way I've been dancing around it myself. "There was a partner," he says, after a moment that costs him visibly to get through. "On a project, some years back now. I haven't spoken about it to anyone outside my own hall in longer than I'd like to admit, and even there, not honestly." "Who?" Tamsin asks, the first thing she said since the proxy woke, something in her own voice tight in a way none of them quite register the reason for yet. "I can't tell you that. Not yet. Not because I don't trust you, because there are pieces of this that aren't only mine to share, and because I genuinely don't know what telling you the rest would set in motion that I couldn't take back afterward." Geary's voice has stripped itself down to something none of them have heard from him before. None of the performance left in it at all. Just plain, exhausted honesty. "I know how that sounds. I know it sounds exactly like every excuse I've ever given you for not answering a direct question properly. I'm asking you to trust me regardless, one more time, because I genuinely believe telling you everything right now would make things worse, not better, and I have never once in my life been more certain of anything than I am of that." "A project," Senna repeats, turning the word over like it might yield more if she presses on it from a different angle. What kind of project needs a partner kept this secret? This long, even from your own hall. The kind I'm not ready to describe to you tonight. Something flickers across the small brass face, there and gone too fast to name properly. Grief, maybe, or something closer to it. "I built things with this partner that I was prouder of than almost anything else I've ever made. There was a stretch of years where the work felt less like labor and more like company, I suppose, is the closest word. I haven't had much of that since, in any form. And then it ended, badly, in a way I still haven't fully made peace with myself, let alone explained to anyone else. That's the truest thing I can give you right now without giving you considerably more than I think any of us are ready for. You say ended, Tamsin says carefully. Not left, not died, ended. Geary's gaze, or whatever in the proxy's small lens passes for a gaze, settles on her a beat longer than the question seems to warrant. You're sharper than I give you credit for. Yes, ended is the right word. I'm not going to tell you why tonight, and I'd ask you not to spend the ride home guessing at it, though I know that's a great deal to ask of 5 clever people with nothing better to do on a long walk. You keep asking for trust, Senna says, not unkindly, but not gently either. You asked for it in Chapter 2, you're asking for it again now. At some point, trust has to be earned by something more than the asking. I know. It's the first time any of them have heard him agree with a criticism rather than deflect from it. I'm not asking because I think I've earned it outright. I'm asking because I don't have anything else left to offer you tonight, and because the alternative, telling you the whole truth before I'm certain what that truth actually does to all of you, frightens me considerably more than asking you to wait a little longer does. How much longer? Bram asks. I don't know. I wish I did. I promise you'll have the rest of it before this is over. Not because you're owed nothing less, though you are, but because I don't think I can keep carrying this alone much longer regardless of what any of you decide tonight. Something that might almost be relief crosses the small brass face. The particular relief of a man who said one true thing after months of careful half-truths, and found the world hasn't ended for having said it. That's not nothing. I know it's not everything, either. Wick studies the proxy for a long moment before speaking, something in his expression weighing the man against everything he's just heard. For what it's worth, and I don't say this lightly, given how this conversation started, I believe that you believe what you just told us. I'm not sure yet whether that's the same thing as it being safe to keep working for you. But I believe it. That's more than I expected tonight, Geary says quietly. I won't pretend it isn't. They step out into the hall to decide, the proxy left dormant on the table behind them, and the conversation that follows is shorter than any of them expect it to be, given everything that's just happened. I don't trust him the way I did a week ago, Senna says. First, because someone has to start it. I want to be honest about that, at least to all of you, even if I can't manage it to him directly yet. None of us do, Orsa says. That's not new information. The question is whether distrust is a reason to stop. Senna is quiet for a moment, turning something over that's plainly been turning over in her since long before tonight's conversation. My whole training tells me to trust the people I serve, until they've given me a real cause not to. Geary's given me cause now, hasn't he? Real cause, not just an uneasy feeling. And some part of me still wants to extend him the same faith I'd extend a hallmaster I've known for years, because that's the shape my oath has always taken, and I don't know how to hold both of those things at once without one of them giving way. You don't have to resolve it tonight, Bram says. You just have to decide whether you're willing to keep working while it stays unresolved. That's a smaller question than the one you're asking yourself. Is it a reason to stop, then? The distrust? Senna asks, half to Orsa, half to all of them. It isn't, Bram says, flat and certain, before Orsa can answer. Whatever's actually happening here, it's bigger than Geary's pride and probably more dangerous than he's letting on. Walking away now doesn't make either of those things less true. It just means we stop being in a position to do anything useful about them. And if doing something useful means more rooms, like Edrin's, Wick asks, though there's no real fight left in the question, more exhaustion than challenge. More gentle ugly wins that don't feel like wins at all? Then we go in with our eyes open this time, Senna says. All of us. No more pretending the job is simpler than it's turned out to be. That's the part I can actually agree to, Wick says. Eyes opened. No more pretending. Whatever else any of us believe about him right now. Even after everything you said in there? Believing him, Senna asks. Believing he's telling the truth about being frightened isn't the same as believing he's told us everything we need to know to be safe. I can hold both. I think we're going to have to get used to holding both, the further this goes. Wick shrugs, the gesture of a man settling into an uncomfortable position, because it's the only one currently available. Eyes open just means we stop letting the second one talk us out of noticing the first. I keep thinking about the mark, Tamsin says quietly, drawing every eye in the hallway toward her without quite meaning to. And the captain's polite contact. And now this, a partner, kept secret even from his own hall. None of it adds up to anything I can name yet, but it's the same shape of thing, every time. And I don't think any of us actually believe it stops mattering just because we'd rather it did. She doesn't say the rest of it, that the warmth she'd felt touching Edrin's armor still hasn't fully faded from her own scar, that some part of her has started flinching every time anyone says the word partner out loud, without quite knowing why. It isn't fear, exactly. It's closer to the feeling of standing at the edge of a story that already has her name written somewhere inside it, in ink she hasn't found yet. So I keep pulling on it, Bram says, carefully, together, whatever it turns out to be. Orsa looks around at the four of them, tired faces under low hallway lamplight, none of them quite the same people who'd answered a vague posting at the open hand exchange 2 weeks ago, and something in her expression settles into quiet, unsentimental resolve. Then we're agreed, she says, not because we trust him fully, because the work matters regardless of whether the man asking for it deserves our trust outright. Those aren't the same question, whatever he'd like to believe. Nobody argues with that, and the agreement that follows isn't triumphant or even especially comfortable. Just 5 tired people, standing in a hallway that smells of hot metal and old solvent, choosing, with open eyes and real reservation, to keep going anyway. Conditionally, Tamsin says, quietly, like she's the one putting the actual word to what everyone else has just agreed to without naming it. We keep going. Conditionally, Senna echoes, and the others nod. Not a vote, not a ceremony, just 5 heads inclining in the same tired direction. At roughly the same moment, the closest thing to consensus, this exhausted a group is capable of producing tonight. Nobody says anything else. Nobody needs to. They make their way back out into aetherglen's lamplit night, and a silence that, for the first time since Wrenhollow, feels less like the absence of words and more like the simple, settled quiet of people who've said the only thing that actually needed saying. Above them, the city siphons glow their familiar, indifferent orange against the dark, the same as they have every night since long before any of this began, and will, presumably, long after it ends, utterly unbothered by the fact that 5 people walking beneath them have just quietly redrawn the terms of their own trust.